Yeah, unfortunately not.
Shape the future.
Yeah.
Well, I know where are you based out of actually?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually on the West Coast, just outside the San Francisco area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep. That's where I grew up in the Bay Area. I was there a long time, and then about 10 years ago, moved to Los Angeles.
Okay. Okay.
And after Los Angeles, yeah, I just moved here to the UK about a year ago to Edinburgh.
Oh wow, quite the adjustment.
Yeah, we vacationed here a lot and just loved it. And we wanted to move out of Los Angeles for a while,
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
yeah, just for like family reasons with all the kids.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, what? Tell me a bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, actually, not from the California area, actually from Tennessee. Had the opportunity to come out here to pursue a football education at UC Berkeley, Cal, go Bears, which was awesome. Coming from Tennessee to California was completely different, a huge adjustment. So being out here was something that I always, honestly, always dreamed of. But then, had the opportunity to play and get really good in college, which was awesome. Just worked really hard on my craft. And then after that, had the opportunity to play professionally in the NFL, which was definitely quite the experience to say the least. But I learned a lot from it, and then more or less of kind of the time I had there, the people I learned from, it just made sense for me to transition on to this whole tech space and all this sales world that we're in right now. And it's been a dream come true. I've been loving it.
So, so first of all, what position did you play?
Yeah, sure. So I played defensive end, and I'd like to say, I mean, I don't want to talk about in other positions. I'd like to say probably one of the more athletic positions because you have to be really strong and really fast. It's not really a position where you have to be only fast or only really big. So I was the one that was sacking the quarterbacks. If there's anyone here who knows a lot about football.
Yeah. Ouch. I would not want to be that quarterback.
Yeah, I will say though, since leaving, I've probably dropped like 30 pounds. So I'm not quite the force that I was before, but I think I'll give myself some credit. While I was doing that, I was definitely putting the pain on some people.
Yeah. So sorry, you don't know if you realize I went to Stanford and Berkeley, great school. We used to call I don't know why we called it the weenies. Because for those of you listening, there's a big, Stanford, Berkeley had a big rivalry. Um, Maybe the main one.
Yeah, definitely. So we played the big game, and I will say kudos to Stanford. You all won this year, so we're definitely a little bitter on that.
Yeah.
But it is always cool to see the rivalry.
Yeah. Yeah, as usual.
Yeah, yeah.
So sorry, when did you go to Berkeley?
Yeah, so I finished in 2011. So and then after that, I played professionally for about 3 to 4 years, and I wrapped it up. I had some injuries, and the career they have this like saying in football, NFL is not for long. It stands for not for long. The career in football is really taxing on your body, and it's also really challenging because it's extremely competitive. So I wrapped it up in I'd say about 2015, summer 2015, around that time, and I've been out of there since.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to like how that transitioned to sales, but one other question: what was like one industry actually working in the NFL in a professional sport, which is probably probably the highest profile sport, professional sport in the states?
Mhm.
I don't know. Maybe baseball. It's hard to say it, but it's let's call it the top one. Like, what's something that was interesting to me learn from like working in that industry?
Yeah, honestly, it's one, the job security in the NFL is really challenging because you think about it, every single year, the best people are coming up to basically take your spots. And, they have entire teams in the NFL literally trying to replace you year in and year out. So you actually have to win every single day. Like you see it time and time again, where if someone just doesn't show up, they're not having a good day, don't have the mindset, then they get cut. I've seen, numerous situations where we had games and I saw a guy make one bad play and he comes off to the sidelines like, you know what, tomorrow I will not be here because of that one bad play. And, true to what he said was a reality. So it was definitely a very challenging job experience, but just being at that high level and seeing how competitive things can be where you're, literally with the elite, the best of the best in your game was awesome. And I learned a lot from that. And it's more or less what's kind of shaped me up into who I am as a sales leader.
Yep. Any other things? What do you think helped you actually make the transition from college to professional? Because that's a hard one to make. Like, and they can't be. I don't know how many college players there are, and that's even to get to college football is going to be incredibly competitive. But to go from college to pro,
Yeah, it was, honestly, that transition from college to pro was pretty interesting, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say the athletes in at the college level and the NFL level are that different. I mean, I'd say from high school to college is a huge jump. Like you're talking about someone who's like 16, 17, 18 years old versus like a 24, sometimes 23, 24-year-old man. That's physically you're not quite ready at times in college, but that wasn't necessarily the case in the NFL. The biggest contributing factor was the elite players in the NFL were highly skilled. They were either highly skilled, they knew the game in and out before, more than anyone else, and they just essentially mastered their craft. So when I got to the professional level and I realized, and I had the opportunity to play with some great athletes, some people that eventually will be Hall of Famers. And when I saw how hard they worked and how much they truly were masters of what they were doing, that's when I started to realize that, to be really great at that level, it's just really understanding your strengths, mastering them, and just not letting anyone beat you with what you're supposed to be good at. And at the college level, you can kind of get away with things just because like people aren't quite as skilled or don't know the game as much. But at the professional level, it's not that people are more athletic. It's just they're a lot more skilled and a lot more knowledgeable as to what it takes to win.
You have to get that experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, maybe walk us through, because it was about 5 years ago you left the NFL. Like how'd you end up in sales?
Yeah, yeah, that was quite the transition. And when leaving football, there's a stat that kind of players get thrown around. And I'm not sure how accurate it is nowadays, but they call it the 3Ds. So within 10 years, a large portion of NFL players are either in debt, divorced, or dead. So when we realize that we're done playing, we're all frantically trying to find a way to not be one of those people. And honestly, it was a bit scary because I had this lifelong dream of always being an NFL athlete. Like I finally got the opportunity to do that. And granted, I did go to UC Berkeley, which is a phenomenal school, and that was more of my backup plan. I want to get a great education so I can transition to something afterwards. But honestly, because I was so focused on getting there, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I did know that like I had a certain skill set that I acquired from getting to NFL that I had to find a way to leverage, and that was honestly just my mindset, right? Like to get to the NFL in terms of how I embraced failure, in terms of how I'm seeking feedback from people, how curious I was to find ways to grow. Just also being very conscious of the fact that any skill can be improved. Um, I knew I had to find a particular function or role or career that helped me basically get compensated based upon that. And I talked to a lot of people, and the more and more I started talking to people, I started realizing that sales was honestly the natural transition. And honestly, I remember when I got into my SDR role, like I barely knew what digital marketing was. I barely knew if you talk about pipeline, I thought pipeline was like literally just for plumbing. I had no idea what it was about. So I definitely will say I was very raw when I first started, but because of my mindset, it made the transition a lot easier than I'd probably say other people.
Yeah. So you started as an SDR. Like, actually, what was your first job?
Yeah, it was an SDR. So it was calling, emailing, social wasn't quite what it is right now, but taking the whole multi-channel approach. I will say it's probably a lot easier to call nowadays with all the data that's out there for SDRs to be effective. But I have so many stories of calling CMOs, CROs, CEOs, and just getting destroyed on the phone. And that was a really tough thing to go through because you got to think about it, right?
I'm sure those quarterbacks used to tackle, probably call it karma.
Exactly. But it was kind of a weird transition, right? Because I was in the NFL and I was used to people knocking on my door to try and get interviews and talk to me, and going from that kind of status to the point where I was hunting people down, and honestly, to put it in better words, like not getting treated very well for it. It was definitely quite the adjustment. But honestly, through those failures, I took them as opportunities to learn, and it was a lot of fun. It was I definitely will always cherish my time as an SDR. And every now and then, obviously, I'm more of a senior leader role right now, and I don't get the opportunity, but I always, enjoy the opportunity to prospect just a little bit because it's kind of what made me as a leader. And it's what I enjoyed the most when I was first starting out in sales.
Yeah, I get that. What what are you actually doing now then?
Yeah, sure. So I currently lead a sales development team at a company called Six Sense. And Six Sense is essentially an account-based orchestration platform that helps teams identify which companies are in market for their solutions so they can prioritize them and ultimately convert them based upon people that are actually interested in buying your product. So I've basically built out an East Coast, West Coast team, leading a team of about 20 SDRs right now. And, honestly, as mentioned, I started as an SDR, but then I became an AE. I got to the closing role, which was awesome. But when I was in that role for about a year or so, I still really missed prospecting and leading SDR teams. And I feel like a lot of my skill set and my just experiences as an NFL athlete like directly translate into leading at sales development organizations. And that's kind of why I made that jump back from being account executive to leading SDR teams.
Yep. Uh, And I think, we've seen like you mentioned like social media has changed a lot the last few years. I mean, everything changes. What are you seeing these days as for your teams, the techniques to help get meetings, and how has that changed the last few years?
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up too, because with prospecting nowadays, the minute you kind of figure something out, it changes. Obviously, because if everyone's doing it, then you have to find different ways to kind of prospect and different strategies. One thing that I'm starting to see become a lot more prevalent, or something that everyone's using more frequently, is just the use of intent data or any kind of data at the hands of our BDRs. Because we've kind of realized what can happen if you put a lot of focus on that. You're starting to see a lot of different companies, a lot of different solutions, a lot of different strategies focus on giving BDRs, SDRs different kinds of data to know more about their prospects and what gets them to tick, and kind of whether or not they're actually ready to make a purchase. And you're seeing a lot of teams use that to generate meetings. So my team definitely uses that very heavily. But in terms of the channels, I would definitely say social has like completely continued to skyrocket. Even the fact that we've even seen like even this the little micro communities on Slack channels and things like that, like
Yep.
people just want to have different conversations in different avenues. And to be a successful SDR team now, you have to respect the fact that people are everywhere. Like you have to call people, you have to do social, you have to email, you have to do video, because our prospects are so used to being reached out to different avenues that we have to respect the fact that that one avenue you're focusing on, whether it's the phone or whether it's just only email or whether it's only social, may not be the one that is best for all of your prospects. So the only way to really take advantage of any kind of intent data or data that you have access to is to be truly multi-channel.
Yeah, and I'm guessing, by the way, we'd love to hear a bit about the stack you use there at Sixth Sense. I
Yeah,
mean,
sure.
in
Definitely.
addition, and plus you can tell us a bit about Sixth Sense, 'cause I assume it's part of the stack, but like, yeah, what are the tools that your team uses?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say we use Alice and Sendoso for gifting. I think gifting we've started to see a lot of different gifting solutions kind of go up recently. That's been awesome. We use SalesLoft as our sales engagement tool. We use Video, which actually has an integration within SalesLoft to send our videos. We use Drift, which again has video within there, but a really strong way to have engagement with people on your website. Obviously, we use Sixth Sense, which has been foundational for just prioritizing accounts and knowing what to say to people based upon what kind of research they're doing. But I think those are the main, unless I'm forgetting anything right now, those are the main ones that we use. I definitely say out of all of those, the main focus is using Sixth Sense, because in terms of what kind of channels you're using and what you're saying to people, you have to have a prioritized list of accounts to go after, so you're not wasting time. One of my big mantras in just terms of leading BDR teams is just overall efficiency. So making sure that the team is spending their time on the right accounts, the ones most likely to convert, is a big priority for us.
Yeah, no, it's key. So by the way, you mentioned video. Now, I've always seen a lot of conflicting information on whether video works and when video works. Have you seen video work
Yes. So the
when?
reason, yeah. So the reason why is I think people have different expectations around what you should be doing video with. If your main metric for using video is getting a meeting off of the first or second touch of the email or social touch, then I don't think that's enough. I define success within my team is if we send out a video to a certain organization, it gets clicked a ton, or that video gets viewed by a ton of people. That's success, because that's taking a true account-based approach to prospecting into the territory. So think about it this way: if I'm a BDR who sends out a video to one person and I see that 40, 50 people, like 40, 50 times it's getting opened and clicked, that lets me know that my message of what I'm trying to send to the organization is getting shared broadly. So SalesLoft kind of identified this metric of video use increases response rates by 26%. I think you can kind of treat that to like your first touch of an email or your second touch of an email as a way to drive response. But a thing that people often neglect is thinking about what happens when you send a video to an organization and it gets viewed by a ton of people. Because if you're continuing to be persistent with your prospecting, the fact that people have seen your name and your video makes it much more likely for you to get a response from people. So I would definitely say it's not effective if you're only looking at it from one metric. It's very effective if you're looking at it for both. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily spend a lot of time on the second one.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so when you, if let's say, just to dig a bit more into video, how is your team? You say you send a video. Is it someone saying hi for 30 seconds? Are they sharing, like, what kinds of videos are you sharing? Or what do you see working?
Sure. So creativity is the key. I think a lot of people, and it's kind of hard too. It's like one of those things where with prospecting, people have a lot of different ways of sending different templates, different call scripts, whatever it may be. And the more you start seeing that, the more pervasive certain content becomes, then the less likely you're going to win with that. So a big thing that my team focuses on is creativity, first and foremost with the thumbnail that we're using. That's the first thing the person's going to be able to see. And if that thumbnail is creative and engaging, they're obviously going to click the video. And then within the first 5 to 10 seconds of the video, making something kind of quirky or unique, obviously providing value throughout the video is really important. But we tend to take the approach of not just doing something generic where it's like, here's a demo of our product, or here's something interesting on your company's page. We try really hard to be very specific to the people using any kind of information we have, whether it's intent data, whether it's something we see on their social profile, to make it very unique to them. And then based upon that, that's how we're able to find wins. But we've noticed if you're only using like more generic videos where it's just like a product demo or something that's kind of can be sent to a lot of people, that those don't find levels of success.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So video, I mean, maybe walk us through, did you have, if you were going to kind of, you may not use again, standard ones, but, for a sequence, if you're going to think about like, kind of take a general sense of, oh, we generally do this with our sequences. We've got about X steps over like, X weeks, and maybe just like walk us through
Yeah, sure.
generic.
Sure. So the metrics we try and follow is in, and I will say, shameless plug for you. I do have my predictable revenue book here.
All right, there you go.
Very foundational for the things I've built out. But the reason why I call that out is because, when you think about email strategy, we're using cadences or sequences. The amount of touches that it took to generate a response from people, say 10 years ago versus now, has significantly increased, because you got to think about this way.
Every year. Yeah.
Yeah. People are just more numb to it. Like back in the day when people were not emailing or were not using call-in 2.0, all these things that, we've kind of built into our foundations, like you could essentially do fewer touches because people weren't seeing it as often. But now, because automation has become a standard within everyone's tech stack, like the amount of touches you have to do is a lot more than it was before. So it does require a ton more discipline. So we tend to have a metric within our team of having about 17 to 22 steps within our sequences and or cadences that extend over the course of about 30 something days, but really important to have it as multi-channel. So within our cadences or sequences, we start with social first, trying to build, and we have like a whole social strategy of, connect with the person, build rapport, then you ask. I think nowadays, if you're using social, you're just going straight to the gun and asking for a meeting. People don't really like that as much anymore. So we tend to start out our sequences and cadences with some kind of social interaction. We're trying to drive curiosity. Then we provide value across the board. But it's the biggest thing behind it is it has to be multi-channel, and it does require different levels of discipline to use really strong cadences or sequences. And we've seen different tactics of building an entire sequence with all the channels. We've seen different tactics of building an only email cadence and only social cadence, only phone cadence, and having different triggers based upon engagement to push people to different cadences. But the most important thing is still, this remains like time tested. People don't reach out as much as they should. Like you'll still have people only doing 4 or 5 emails or only doing 2 or 3 calls. And if you don't have the discipline to make sure the team is going through the cadence for as long as they possibly can, then you're going to fall short. So that's a big metric we focus on.
Yeah, I get that. When you're talking about the different channels, I mean, there's the 3 big ones, right? There's phone, email, and LinkedIn. And you mentioned Slack. There's a lot of like, use the term micro communities, right? There's Facebook groups. There's all this other. Is there any other kind of types of channels that you see pop up? Are you starting to explore more of, or is it a little bit of everything besides, 98% email, phone, LinkedIn, and everything else is kind of experiments here and there?
Yeah, I would definitely have to say the micro communities are more experimental right now. Especially this past year, I'm not exactly sure if that's because of COVID and people are just looking for different ways to engage with people. They've exploded, right? And my team, we utilize those to generate meetings with people. But the thing is, it's still experimental because people tend to look at these micro communities as kind of safe spaces. So you can't necessarily like go directly into a Slack channel with someone and just ask them for a meeting out the gate, especially if you see like different things they're talking about or different technology they want to buy. So we've tended to take the approach similar to social of like building a relationship with the person first, obviously, talking to them first, building a relationship, building rapport, and then when it's appropriate, asking for a meeting. And that's how we found different levels of success, but it's still experimental to us. And I'm not exactly sure what it's going to look like as we keep pushing forward.
Yeah. Leadership question. So again, kind of what are the metrics you're focusing on every month, every week, every day.
Yep, definitely. So I think from an activity standpoint, number of accounts pursued, emails, phone, social
Per what period?
per BDR per month. So you can track on a more granular level and look at it per week. We try and make sure that each BDR, and this is based on our capacity within our segments. We know, and this varies, greatly whether or not you're going after an SMB accounts, mid market account, enterprise strategic, right? But for our space and kind of where we sit, we want to have each BDR, SDR going after about 25 accounts per week. Now, the challenge within that is making sure that the quality is still intact. So just trying to build a really strong, efficient system so they're not just like pushing out numbers because that kind of defeats the purpose. But we want to have the team go after about 25 accounts per week, roughly 100 accounts per month. Email is probably a challenging one. We don't want people just like pushing play and sending out batch and blast sequences. So we try and make sure that we manage based upon certain highly personalized templates that you can put into a sales loft or an outreach. And within that metric, we try and see each person push up roughly about 150 emails per week. And then calls, one metric that we're focused on is not just pure dials, but actually connects and or voicemails. And to that point, we want to make sure that we have about 50 to 70 on a weekly basis, which does require us to have really strong data. So we do have our team kind of really farming that and making sure that, we actually have mobile numbers and direct dial so the team isn't wasting their time. But I will say our approach to metrics is to make sure that because we don't want to push to a number that's something that people can't necessarily do and it's not quite achievable, because if you do that, your quality kind of starts to suffer from that. So our baseline metrics are more metrics to focus on to make sure that you're doing your best job or you're doing okay to be successful, not necessarily to overextend yourself, because once you do that, that's when you start realizing that quality becomes an issue.
Yeah, true. When you say 50 to 70, you talk about the connects, right? Connects or voicemails.
Correct. Yes. And honestly, that just depends on, the amount of dials we do will probably be anywhere from like, depending on how good your data, yeah, your data has to be good. That's the hard part about it. So we're really religious on making sure that we're not just like putting any phone number in there. So the amount of dials, it ends up coming out to be like 100, 110, depending on what you're doing. But we don't track the number of dials. We look at the connects and our voicemails.
Yeah. Well, if you get 110 dials to 50 connects or voicemails, that's a pretty. I have heard, actually, I'm not as much on this as some of the people on the team, that ZoomInfo has a lot of like cell phones now these days. And of course, with people going virtual, it's kind of shaking up a whole lot of the data space.
Yeah, most definitely. And we have realized that even the people that don't have their mobile numbers, you can still get the direct dials that get directed to the person's mobile number.
Yeah.
So we're still finding success in that. But I will say I was really nervous when COVID initially happened that we wouldn't be able to call people. And whatever data provider you have, I think that, different data solutions kind of work best in certain industries and, certain verticals. But whatever you have, obviously making sure that you have high quality is really important, because your team is heavily relying on that.
Yep. But yeah, I think that, if we had 100 SDR teams, I wouldn't actually even be able to guess how many really focus on the phone, how many kind of ignore it. I think the default, I believe, tends to be that a lot of the teams and a lot of the SDRs tend to want to avoid the phone and ignore the phone.
Yeah.
I can't tell, but it still is just as important. And a lot of teams who I hear, ours actually, so we have an internal outsourcing team, and probably about a third of appointments are set through the phone, but I know there's lots of teams that set 2/3 of their appointments through the phone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's just as important as ever.
And it's interesting, like I kind of feel like people have tried to convince the industry that the phone doesn't work. It still works really well. It's just one of those things that people are a little hesitant to. For us, which kind of goes back to the whole intent data space, is like, it's a lot easier for us to call an account if we see that they're on our website, they're searching certain keywords, they're in market for a solution. And my team finds a lot more confidence in that. Because again, like when I was an SDR, like there were times where I called people and I really, really wish I didn't call them. I really wish I did it. And I think that's part of what gets people to not call, because they don't have the confidence, or it's really difficult to keep doing that over and over again and feel that rejection. But, with better use of data and the fact that it's more pervasive, across the industry, I think BDRs, SDRs are starting to become a little bit more confident. At least I hope so, to make sure that calling still happens, because it does still work.
Yeah. Well, there's also different kinds of calls. I know there can be like kind of research-based calls and the cold call. And so speaking of which, so Sixth Sense, give me a sense of what are actually some of the specific things that Sixth Sense does within your, how does it fit within the actual process of what you do? Is it just on like the account building and profiling? Like how does it actually fit? I've heard about Sixth Sense, but I haven't used it. So
Yeah, sure. So I think to kind of boil it down and make it super simple, with SDRs, it's SDR BDRs is about prioritization, making sure they're going after the right accounts and being super personalized and efficient. So the way we kind of boil it down is within a territory, the platform is able to determine whether or not an account is in market based upon the profile fit, the intent data they're showing, the timing. So similar to like a lead flow where, we have all these response times of like, if you don't respond to a lead within the first 5 minutes, the odds of that converting into an opportunity significantly decrease, right? So
maybe for some,
yeah,
I think that's half truth, half myth, but yeah.
exactly, yeah. But there's a lot of there are a lot of thoughts around that, like inbound response time. Some people say 30 minutes, some people say an hour. It's kind of up in the air with that. But the most important thing is making sure that we're responding to them in a timely fashion. So on the account level, those exact same conditions apply. So we've essentially built out a prioritization system to let the BDRs, SDRs know once an account is in market and is ready to buy your solution, this is the account they need to go after on that given day. And the way our team is basically set up is we have a prioritization dashboard which shows us like I have these three accounts that did these different levels of data. They showed this level of intent. So it's time for me to start reaching out to them. And my team's prioritization is based off of going after like those accounts within that given day. And then once they have the ability to see, that's the certain account, they click into it and see kind of what's the reason why it happened, what triggered it. And we have the ability to see certain keywords that the companies are searching for, certain certain portions of our website that we looked at. But a really I guess unique and more innovative thing that people aren't really thinking about when it comes to in terms of intent data is it's not enough to see that someone's on your website or see they're searching for certain keywords, because similar to like when like the sales loft outreaches yes where it first came out, you couldn't directly say like I saw you click my email, I saw you open my email, let's have a conversation. And people kind of nowadays think you can do that with intent data, but it's not quite appropriate. But the biggest way to make sure you're actioning off of that is we built this thing out called value cards, where it's kind of like a play on words for battle cards. But if an account is searching for a keyword that's relevant to your industry, if an account is on this portion of your website, it's really important for the SDRs and BDRs to know exactly why that's happening and why certain personas would be doing that research and kind of what kind of business problems they're trying to solve. And that's how you get meetings, by providing value. So that's when I talked about like the whole use of data nowadays. Like SDRs and BDRs are a lot more empowered with knowing what to communicate to people based upon what they're searching for, and it makes it a lot easier for them to have a lot more engaging and value-focused conversations.
Yeah. So if they're looking for marketing automation, then with your value card, you could kind of go out and say, hey, if you're looking to learn about marketing automation, here's your.
Exactly. Yeah. So if they're looking for marketing automation, like understanding which persona at the company could be doing that and why, and being able to communicate some value based upon teams that, or what kind of problems a team that's looking for marketing automation would solve with your particular product. And that's the biggest missing link with intent data is people aren't really focusing on that right now. And they should be, because that's the easiest way to get meetings with that kind of data.
Yep. So question, how big, either you've been building this team, managed the team, what are just some advice if you were going to give some advice to either a current or aspiring SDR team manager,
Yep.
or BDR, XDR, whatever you want to call, is your team only outbound, or do you have the inbound prospectors as well on the same team?
Sure. So our lower segment, we get flooded with inbound. So we have one person doing that. But for the most part, we're purely an outbound team focused on the accounts that are market. But if I had to give anyone advice who's building out their first team, like the nut and bolts of what makes you a good BDR leader is just really strong people management. And my thing that I always kind of, go to war with and hang my hat on is you have to make hiring your competitive advantage. And there are a lot of really strong books out there and resources for people to learn how to interview well and what to look for. And that we really focus in on that in terms of making sure we have a good volume of candidates, and we're focusing on these key attributes. But you have to win with your hiring before anything else. And then last but not least, in terms of motivation, really, I call it the 3 C's. The three things that you need to make sure you're always focused on with SDRs and BDRs is there needs to be a career path. Your compensation has to align to the work they're doing, and your culture within your team has to be strong enough to make the team feel heard and motivated. And the minute with those 3 C's, you have one of those that kind of fall off, that's when you're going to have issues where you're going to see people leave. They're not going to feel motivated. It's going to be hard for them to find success. So to kind of sum it up, really strong on the hiring. Always keep your foot on the gas with that, and then always respect the 3 C's, because that's what keeps the team motivated.
Good. Sorry, comp, culture, and
Career.
Career. Yeah.
Career pathing.
It's an important one. It's almost like comp is the short-term motivation to the career long-term. What does your career path look like there?
Yeah, exactly. So, and just to kind of go on that before we even talk about mine, that's a long term goal. Most SDRs and BDRs when they join, and granted, there are some people who love the role and will do it for 15, 20 years, but most SDRs, BDRs use it as a pathway to
Pretty
get
rare though.
sales. I'm sorry.
There's not that many out there. It's usually yeah, it's for yeah, there are some, but for most people, yeah, it's a stepping stone towards something else. But yeah, there are a lot of people who that's their thing they like to do. Great.
Exactly.
They're a
Exactly.
great find too.
Exactly. I completely agree. But to your point, most it's as a North Star for wherever they want to go, whether sales, marketing, operations, name it, whatever it may be. So from my career path, as I mentioned earlier, I was an SDR and I think I took the traditional approach of wanting to become an AE. I did that for a period of time and I loved closing. It's still something that, the fortunate thing about working at Sixth Sense is I still get to help out on the sales side every now and then because we use our own product. So I get my fix of that a little bit. But took the traditional approach, became an AE, and then I realized that, similar to my time in football, I love coaching people. I love motivating people. And the SDR role was something that I knew a lot about. And I felt like I could really perfect and help a lot of people go where they want to go. So I focused in on that. So started as an SDR manager, built up my first team from scratch. And I will say it's really challenging. And I'm sure you've probably seen this. Most SDR leaders, when you first start out, a lot of times at least I've seen this, they're kind of building a team from scratch. So it's really challenging because, most time you're first time manager, you don't have the experience to know exactly what you'll be looking for. So it can be challenging at times. And I kind of encourage anyone who is doing that. There are a lot of people out in the space. The SDR community is full of people that want to help and show you guidance and give you different tactics that will work. So just reach out to people and try and find ways to kind of pick their brain. But when I did that, when I jumped into the SDR manager role, I just went out there profusely and talked to everyone I possibly could, just to kind of learn the best practices of building a strong team. And that's what I did. So I built up my first team, eventually scaled it out to about 13, 14 people. Then I moved on to Sixth Sense, where I took on a director level role. I've been here since I think it's almost 2 years now, and I just recently, this past year, moved on to a senior director role as we're looking to scale from last year going into this year as well.
Yep. So actually, other questions. You got 20, you said East West. Just a bit more about the structure. So if you're a director, whatever, you're the leader, senior director, and then you have managers, how many SDRs per manager? Do you divide by verticals? Just kind of like how people are organized and aligned and in what
Yeah,
directions.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And this probably aligns a little, even going back to predictable revenue, the whole aspect of specialization. So, really
Yeah.
important that you have managers and SDRs aligned to certain verticals and or business units. So we currently have an SMB function, an enterprise function, and even we're like dabbling a little bit into more of the strategic side. So just make sure that we have teams only focused on those because the different prospecting strategies on SMB versus strategic versus enterprise are all completely different. So we're focused on that. And we currently have a ratio of, I think it's 8 to 1 or 9. We're still hiring right now. But I do have one manager I just recently brought on who's more of our manager of pipeline analytics and strategy, who will definitely be helping out a lot in terms of like the whole onboarding enablement and making sure that we can take a lot of our pressure off of our managers to help them kind of do a lot more of the coaching. But I would encourage anyone to try and figure out the ratios. 8 to 1 is probably the safest, unless you have some kind of resource internally to help with onboarding and enablement. And that's kind of what we try and honor. And again, the biggest thing to the point of predictable revenue is you have to have specialization. Having a manager who is focused on SMB, mid-market enterprise reps is not as efficient because they have different priorities based upon which team is going to produce certain levels of pipeline. So it's just important to make sure that everyone's kind of marching in a certain path.
Yeah. And like I said, I think 8, like once you get to like 10, it is true anyone, like 10 reports or it just becomes impossible. Like I remember there's a client a couple of years ago, they had one director, I think had like 18 or 20 direct reports. I mean, they knew they had to change that, but um, so, and then there's an outsourcing company. They had a leader of the prospectors. They had like 25 prospectors. I actually don't remember the name of the company, by the way. This is a couple of years ago, but the leader was supposed to prospect part time, and
Mm,
she was managing like 24 prospectors. So I think it's like they're focused on the P&L,
mhm.
which is yeah, it's just like very was probably not the right focus in terms of like what's going to create the best results for the team and for clients. So it's interesting. But
Yeah.
yeah, 8 to 1's a good.
And that's a challenge that often comes up in the SDR community of just the whole P&L associated with it. And people, like, though we know fundamentally that retaining those 8-to-1 ratios will be more efficient and help the team kind of generate the results we're looking for, people still try and lean a little bit more towards increasing that just for the sake of the P&L, and it's just not the route to go. You got to respect the fact that in order to really get what you want out of that team, those numbers have to be intact.
Yeah. Well, I remember at the 20-to-1 client, like they had a gap, like say the team generally was missing quota by about 30%.
Mm.
And this is part of an assessment I did a couple, and my take was that gap was primarily from the wrong ratio. So if they had bounced out the manager or coach to SDR ratio, they'd be able to get that 30% gap fixed just from hands-on coaching.
Exactly.
Where so Ernest, like from back to football, where do you see kind of like old football lessons or patterns or habits come up in your day-to-day now with this team?
Yeah, sure. So kind of just going back to myself, and especially what I learned in the NFL is you just gotta master your craft. Like I do think it's important for people to be multi-channel, using different aspects of selling and trying to kind of take a broader approach, but like win with what you're really good at. Like find a way to identify what you're strong. And like granted, we always have to honor our weaknesses and find ways to improve upon them. But like if there's that one thing you're really good at, win with that. And I saw that again in the NFL where there was a guy, a teammate, Jared Allen, who's going to eventually be a Hall of Famer. If you asked him to perform certain techniques and moves that he was not accustomed to, he was just not going to get it done. He was not going to be a very effective player. But he had 2 or 3 moves that he could do better than probably anyone in the world. And that's how he made his career. And it's really important for SDRs and leaders too, you know? It's really important for salespeople to identify what those strengths are and just constantly improve upon them. And this whole thing of like taking like a growth mindset is even this guy Jared, who was probably in his like 12th or 13th year in the NFL, he was still trying to find ways to perfect those moves. Like he never settled on the fact that though he's eventually gonna be a Hall of Famer and he had all these great stats, all these accolades, he was never satisfied with the fact that he got it. And I really encourage my team to, and also with my managers as well, to really identify what those skills are from the individual and just fine tune them, but also not neglecting your weaknesses. You have to always kind of respect those, but like find out what you're really good at and win with it every single time. That's the biggest lesson I learned in terms of from a tactic standpoint of what you're going to be a better seller.
Yeah, and actually that makes a lot of sense because especially now with so many types of channels and techniques, I mean, I feel metaphor I use is now the outbound world. It's kind of like the cookbook world, right? You have a million cookbooks, and they all can be a good fit for someone out there. And today, with like the just explosion of content, there's a million outbound techniques. Kind of got to find the ones that work for you. There's not like a silver bullet where some technique works all the time.
Exactly.
But especially like on video, like some people might be great with video just because they have a knack for it. Other people might be better at social media and engaging people because they have a knack for it. So you have to have like a basic competence in across areas, but when people have a special skill, like that specialization is really about focus, really helps the team come together versus trying to make every SDR do the same thing as each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And that lends to a tactic and strategy I don't think works with leaders is taking just a purely volume-based approach that's like standard across the board. I mean, people in sales, there's sales obviously a mix between art and science, right? And people so badly want to just be silenced. They just so badly want to be completely like 100% data driven to the point where like if I just do this for every single person on the team, I will no matter what get this number. And there are ways to kind of move in that direction, but the reality is you can't build a system purely out of 100% volume or purely out of just like certain tactics that everyone should be really good at. And if you are building a team like that, it kind of cuts yourself short because there are people that have really strong strengths that you're just not necessarily utilizing. And it's up to managers to kind of really pull those out and figure out like what individuals are really good at and what they're not good at, and kind of enable them to make sure that the ones that they're strong at, they become better than anyone else on the team at.
Yep. By the way, let's see here. Vera threw over. There's a question from someone on the audience here named Zach. So first of all, he said, shout out to Father Ryan High School where he played against his high school, Memphis University School.
I did.
So here's the question, but the question is, what's the best way to break the pattern of busyness and cold calling? Which might be, hey, do you have any cold calling tips for people?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And this, it's not even just with cold calling, it's just prospecting in general. It's really important to like, and this requires a certain level of discipline. So some people really struggle with this, but you have to block your calendar off for certain tasks. Like if you know that there are certain hours in the day, which typically are in the morning or later in the day for calling, like don't let anything get in the way with that. Like close your phone or close your computer, like turn off notifications from 8:30 to 10, I'm calling. And in terms of like making that really efficient, do your research ahead of time, make sure you have the people that you're going to be calling into, but just trying to find a way to like eliminate as many, especially with calling, because I think that's the one that people struggle the most with, especially because it's easier to find ways to not do it. It's really important to like honor your calendar and make sure that during these certain time spots during the week, no one's going to get in the way of me calling, and I'm just going to sit down and actually hammer through it. So that's probably the easiest thing I would recommend for anyone just trying to find a way to do more calling is to be efficient with making sure you block off that calendar, but also to get more of those calls in, like actually spend some time throughout the course of the week or on certain days of the week to just like find your information, find your people, make sure the data is clean so you can hammer out as many as possible.
Yeah, I will say the prep is key because if you say, hey, I'm going to call for an hour and you spend most of the time like looking for people, like who am I going to call and where's the number? And you just, by the way, like research, kind of like the same thing. Research can be really useful, but also research can become a procrastination.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to I'm still researching. I'm not ready to, I'm
Nope.
going to call. I gotta think about it some more.
Yeah, and
Uh,
honestly, that extends even outside of calling. Like, as long as you fundamentally understand with prospecting that the way you get meetings is providing value to someone, I have to show someone something that's going to make them do their job better. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, and a lot of different things you can communicate to someone that'll get that done. A problem that people have, and I think it's like more of a perfectionist syndrome, is they think that there's just one thing that no matter what will work above everything else, and that kind of neglects the fact that there are a lot of different avenues and research tactics that will get you the meeting as long as you're value focused, and you don't necessarily have to find that one hidden gem for that one account because you might find something really strong, but there are a lot of different ways to get in there, and
yeah,
you
well, the
can't.
hidden gem is usually persistence, follow up.
Exactly, exactly.
But speaking of blocking out the calendar to do calls, I mean, I haven't. God, it's actually been years. I don't think I've cold called like for a prospector since forever. I mean, sometimes for clients, like because we do consulting and assessments, we've done it. But if there's someone came up and said, "Hey, we want to do kind of like not a competition, but like a demo match." So we're going to block out an hour for me to start practicing some cold calls with Connect and Sell. Later this month, early next month. I said, "Yeah, I'm up for doing that, but I got to practice first. I'm pretty rusty. I gotta." And so I,
But I'm glad you bring that up too, because one, I do think from time to time it's good for leaders to get in the trenches and do some calls, but
totally.
it also lends to the fact that like calling is a skill. And I don't want to get too much into the sports weeds, but it's kind of like one of those things where whether you're a golfer or you're shooting free throws, like if you don't practice the skill, you're gonna get rusty. Like when I first started as a cold caller, I was not very good, but because I did it so frequently, I developed the skill. If you ask me to do some cold calls right now, my old self as an SDR would be much better at it than I am right now. It's only because I'm not doing it every single day. So it's really important for people to know that if you want to be a really good caller, like you have to do it consistently and it has to become a part of your daily best practices because you will get rusty. And it's just one of those things that you just can't like do it for a day and then expect to be just as good as you were, a month later. It has to be something you're always doing.
Same thing is like if you want your BDR, your SDRs, BDRs, or even salespeople to be comfortable with it. I mean, it might take several weeks, especially I feel like role playing is so key because outbound calling, depending on your list and what you've got, it's just hard to have a high volume of conversations, or can be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So even if you have a new prospector, it's better to train them on inbound leads typically because they could just talk to more people faster before they switch to
Exactly.
outbound. But
Exactly.
like at least with role playing, you can get a bunch of practice in quickly, which
It,
builds some to that comfort level and confidence.
Exactly. I think that role playing is probably one of the easier ways to build confidence with calling, but also just kind of even build the skill. I don't think teams do it as much as they should. I think a lot of people, because there's so much software out there to kind of review calls and gather feedback, which is great, obviously helps people improve their calling. They kind of pull back from the role playing side of it, which is obviously an actual natural conversation. So if you are looking for ways to be better caller, just incorporating that to any way you can is important.
Yep. Well, Ernest, let's wrap up pretty soon. I don't know if there's any for the team watching this, any last questions from the audience. But meanwhile, Ernest, where's the best, if people want to follow you or
Yeah,
talk to you or learn from you or whatever, where's the best place for them to find you?
sure. So I'd probably say the three channels you can find me. One, before anything else, LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/Ernest Owusu. And I will say the name Ernest Owusu, you think there aren't a lot of people, but if you do a Google search, there are a lot of Ernest Owusu. Just trust me on that. So look for this face if you possibly can. So LinkedIn is probably the first, Ernest Owusu. Second, I'd probably say Twitter. I'm pretty active on there every now and then. And last but not least, in a lot of these micro communities, you can probably just find me. You can always Slack me and just ask me questions, things like that.
Okay, great. I think got tips. Yeah, I like, by the way, if you ever feel like you want to move on from there and ha find something else, I have to talk about what we're doing predictable revenue.
Definitely, definitely.
Um, so actually for the last topic, I want to kind of switch topics a bit here as we get close to wrap up. It's been a while, and unfortunately it's kind of died out for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world, but in the last summer, there was the Black Lives Matters movement. What was that? I just, you know, at Sixth Sense, are you like, what was that like at the company? What do you think the company did right? What do you now, like all these months later, kind of just curious, where do you think about it much? How's it come up?
Yeah,
Um, what
yeah,
would you
definitely.
recommend to people? Like, what do you want to see happen at this point?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing with the social environment this past summer was it kind of really forced people to see a lot of things that honestly people of color experience every day, but just didn't really talk about too much. I feel fairly fortunate. A couple of like I guess thought leaders, if you want to call it, and we created this Slack community called we just renamed it called the Sales Culture, where we basically create a community of Black sales professionals who basically go in as a safe space to talk to each other about what we're doing, what we're experiencing. We did this about a year ago, so even before all this stuff started happening. And for me, as a Black person going through all of that, it was really good to have a community of people just to talk to and share my experiences and let them know how I was feeling. I even remember when all that stuff initially happened, I just had to take a day off of work because I just couldn't. I had to just like stop for a second because I realized what was going on and started to see how much people were like paying attention to it. And it just was really overwhelming. So for me, it was really challenging, but having that community was really helpful. But in addition to that, my company did a really good job of making sure that people had opportunities and resources to learn more about it, to ask questions, to share their experiences, regardless of whatever your ethnicity was. So that was really good. And I also think even externally outside of Sixth Sense, I had a lot of people just ask me about what it was like to be Black in America, what it's like to be the only in a room where I'm used to that by now, but a lot of people aren't used to that. So this year was definitely really challenging. The fact that it kind of exposed a lot of things to people that they probably weren't really familiar with, but in that discomfort, it was really exciting for me because I know that like we're not going to see this stuff change within the next year as much as people want it to be. That's just not how this stuff works. But I am very confident in the fact that like when people kind of go out of their way and more people are exposed to it in due time, these things will slowly start to disappear. So that's me, I guess, being opportunistic and optimistic about what can happen. But I think that with all the social environment that happened this past year and how crazy things were, things are moving in the right direction. And I felt it definitely within my company, but also within the sales culture where I had places to talk to people about it.
Yes, yeah, I think it's set in motion like a lot of things that may not be as obvious until this year, or next year, or 3 years.
Exactly. And I will add on that note too. So, anyone out there and before all the stuff that happened, I'm huge on diversity in tech. It's been a huge problem for a long time where there's not very much representation across the board. If anyone has any questions about that kind of stuff, or if you have certain people of color that like need a mentor or someone to talk to, please reach out to me because the community that we've built, it's about 300 plus people, almost 400 now, has been a really strong place to just talk and share and basically be a community for everyone. But also, even if you're not going to be part of that, I'm really passionate about this, and I always want to find ways to help organizations better diversify their space and find different resources to bring onto the organization. So I just want to make sure that people can kind of find that resource in me if they'd like to do that.
Yep, great. Appreciate that in the offer. All right, well, let's wrap up. Thanks very much, Ernest. Great, real pleasure to get to meet you, get to know a bit about your journey there and what's going on in the SDR world. And
Awesome.
thank
Yeah,
you for joined us on the tube.
for sure. And
And
I will say, and for you too, very much a pleasure to meet you. I will say,
yeah, great. I mean, don't forget you in the Impossible book.
that's next on the list.
That in there. That's a lifesaver for a lot of companies out there.
Definitely so.
And I also want to thank Vero and Mary and any of the other people on the marketing teams that help set this up.
Most definitely.
All right.
Awesome.
Take care. See you,
Thanks.
everyone.